My name is Melinda Walker, and I'd like to welcome you to the League of Women Voters of Lexington First Friday Forum about the stewardship of Lexington's conservation lands. Just in case you don't know, the Lexington League of Women Voters is one of the most active leagues in in Massachusetts, and the only one in Lexington. And we continue to provide many opportunities for voter education in town. In the upcoming year, we have a very busy schedule, and on October 30th, we will be presenting an evening forum entitled The Voting Wars of 2012 with Professor Charles Stewart of MIT. We are going to be co-sponsoring another community conversation in the winter on climate change, and we are actively working with the 300th Birthday Committee, and we're looking forward to convening a mock town meeting with middle school students in the spring. And as always, we will be hosting Candidates Night before the town elections in March. We are in the middle of our membership and fundraising drive, and if you would like to join us, there are membership forms on the table where you came in. I would like to say a special thank you to the hardworking committee members that organized the First Friday Forums: Nancy Adler, Jinx Crouch, Peggy Enders, Lisa Rhodes, Sandra Shaw, and Judy Uhrig. And now Sandra is going to introduce our program for this morning.
Greetings to our First Friday fans. We're really happy to see you and to start a new, I think, exciting season. Today, as you know, this is our topic, and Lexington, which has more than 1,400 acres of conservation land, which is 12% of our whole area, and much more land conservation than many towns in our area. How did all of this land become conservation land, and how does the town manage to care for all of it? We are fortunate to have a panel of experts with us today to help us answer these questions. Conservation Department staff members Karen Mullins and Emily Schadler, as well as Conservation Commission member and steward Stuart Kennedy. That's hard to say, you know, Stewart. But you're well named. And Conservation Steward Bob Hausslein. The panel will discuss the history, acquisition, and stewardship of our conservation lands, as well as future of promoting and protecting our town's national heritage. At the conclusion of the panel discussion, we will be happy to take your questions. Our first speaker today is Emily Schadler. Emily has served as Lexington's Conservation Stewardship Coordinator for 4 years, focusing primarily on land management and conservation planning. She works directly with the Lexington Conservation Steward volunteers to care for our conservation land. She earned her master's degree from the University of Vermont's Field Naturalist program. Emily.
So any of you who I have previously corrected and told you my last name is Schadler, I'm actually wrong. I found out that I've been pronouncing my last name wrong because it's a German name, and I met some German girls this summer and they said, no, it should actually be Schadler. So if I ever corrected you, please forgive me. I'm trying to change this bad tendency that I have. So I'm going to speak for a little while, but I'm sharing the panel today with my colleagues. And so I'm going to start off and just spend a little bit of time talking about how we got to the landscape that we have in Lexington today, and sort of in 15 minutes, the history of the landscape here in town. And then Karen is going to take over and talk more about how we acquire new conservation land today to add to that landscape. And then Stu and Bob are going to take over and talk about how we care for it and give you some really cool examples of stuff that we've been doing on conservation land. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit. I'm going to move this up a bit. And, I'm supposed to be speaking into this, I think, too. Peggy, is that okay? Okay. So we're going to go back in time a bit and think about what Lexington looked like pre-settlement. So early 1600s, if you came to Lexington, what might you have seen? And the landscape looked a lot different at that point, obviously. That's not a surprise to anyone. What you would have seen when you came to Lexington then was mostly forest and some open areas, but the open areas probably were wet meadows and swamps, somewhat like Tophet Swamp today, or Arlington's Great Meadow, or Dunback Meadow, which at that point actually was known as the Great Swamp, and it was a really famous area for hunting, beaver and otter and muskrat and mink. So we had a whole different array of wildlife that was here. There were bear, there were wolves, at some point there were even elk, and all of that was sort of here in Lexington and roaming the land and sort of setting up a different sort of landscape than we imagine might have been here. And there were towering white pines that were a lot bigger than any white pines you've seen today. And a whole different variety of plant species that were here as well. And none of the invasives that are here now were here at that point, of course. And so when you were here in early 1600s, mostly you would have seen forests and you would have seen swamps. But of course, over time, one of the first big changes that happened after that ancient forest swamp was a transition into an agricultural landscape. And I'm sure everyone here knows that Lexington's first name was actually Cambridge Farms. And that's because it was such a great area for settlers to settle in and start setting up an agricultural society. And so Lexington, this picture, is not actually a historic photo. That's a picture of Keza Farm that was taken last year. But I made it black and white so it looks all old. And I think it really represents what Lexington, a lot of Lexington would have looked like from sort of the mid 1600s all the way up through the 1700s and into the 1800s. And so what you would have seen would be pastures, hay fields, and market gardens over much of the landscape. And so what had been forest and swamp was converted into what was agricultural, and it was very productive land. And where you had trees during those times were in woodlots, so for producing firewood or producing timber. And then along, as is in this picture, along the hedgerows, along the edges of the fields, along old stone walls, and sometimes even out in the middle of fields, you would have big trees that were left for shade for livestock. And those signs of those things you can still find on the landscape when you go out and explore conservation areas today. Stone walls that are now hidden back in forest again, but really when they were put there, were put out in the middle of a field. And big wolf trees, which are huge old trees that have spreading branches that grew out in the middle of fields that used to be shade trees for pasture animals. And so all of that was how Lexington looked for a broad period of time. And then the next sort of shift that came in Lexington's history was the transition into primarily a residential community versus primarily an agricultural community. And that was happening towards the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, but really picked up around World War I, when veterans were coming home, families were settling in, Boston was really growing. There was sort of a whole transition into building homes for veterans. And so Lexington started to become a really popular place, of course, because it's so close to Boston. It was such a great community for housing. And so a lot of that, what was forest and then what was agricultural land, was now transitioning into more of a residential community. And then the introduction of the Route 95, 12895, and Route 2, and then also the train line, of course, helped to make Lexington a really great residential community because of the ease of access. And so around this time, this was happening in Lexington, but it was also happening in a lot of communities around Boston. And so in 1957, the state legislature passed what was the first act of its kind in all of the United States, and it was the Conservation Commission Act. And so this was the first act that allowed local town government to purchase and permanently protect open space. And it was a pretty big deal. It was a big move, and it didn't take Lexington too long to hop on the bandwagon. So that was 1957 that the act was passed, and then in 1963, Lexington instated its first Conservation Commission. And it was by a vote of special town meeting, and the original commission was 5 members. And some of you, I don't know if anyone in here recognizes any of these names. Oh, good, you do. That's great. So the first commission was started in 1963, and it was initially in the beginning when the commission was started, there was no Wetlands Protection Act. And I think a lot of you are probably familiar with the commission today spending a lot of time on wetlands protection. And there actually wasn't a Wetlands Protection Act, so that was not at all a part of what the commission started doing. Initially, when the commission was enacted, the purpose was to protect natural resources in town, and that was primarily through acquisition of land. And so I wanted to read you a passage from the first town report that the commission had, which was 1964, when they were the first full year that they had been in. And so this is what their summary of what that first year's activity was. They said, the commission set about its first task to discover the open space needs of the town, to index the open spaces and other natural resources available, and to plan and implement the means of using the resources to meet the needs. The commission quickly found that the town's needs were great. Though Lexington is blessed with a unique rural and historic heritage, most of the open land is privately held and awaiting development. So that was sort of where the commission started with their work. And so over the next 20 years, from 1964 to about 1984, the commission acquired 1,000 acres of land. And that largely includes much of the land, the bigger chunks of property that you know today as conservation land, like Willard's Woods, Whipple Hill, Hayden Woods, sort of the big pieces of land and piecing together bigger pieces of land that are sort of now what everyone recognizes as conservation land. And so when you look through our database, most of the early dates of acquisition are from 1964 to 1984. Today we have about 1,400 acres of conservation land, so it's just those first 20 years got 1,000 of those 1,400 acres, and then it was 400 acres in the next 30 years of the commission. So what sort of happened over time was the commission was sort of busy figuring out which properties would best serve the community as conservation land, and then acquiring those. And but over time, what happened was that the land prices were rising in town. Town was getting more crowded. Town was also getting, most of the bigger parcels started to already have been protected. And so the transition happened with the commission where instead of focusing on acquiring all the time, they had to start thinking a little bit more about caring for what they had and then being really strategic about acquiring land that would add to what they had already acquired or make connections between lands. And also at the same time in the 1970s, the Wetlands Protection Act came into existence. And that sort of picked up steam and over time became a big part of their commitment was dealing with wetlands protection regulations. So that was sort of a shift shifts that were happening on the landscape were also affecting the way that the commission operated over time. So in the 80s, Citizens for Lexington Conservation. Oh, I know. Is Eileen here? She's in here. Yeah. That's such a great picture. In the 1980s, the Citizens for Lexington Conservation helped to get a volunteer group together that would help the commission take care of all of the land that they had been acquiring over time. And so that ended up morphing into what's today. This is from 2012 at Parker Meadow. This is the Lexington Conservation Stewards, which became that branch of the commission which does all of the caretaking for the conservation land. And so that organization today gives over 2,000 hours of time, which is about one full staff member's time in a year to taking care of that land that had been acquired. The original 1,000 acres and then the 400 that have been sort of slowly picked in since the mid-1980s. And so what you see on the landscape today in terms of what's out there for conservation land is a result of first that forest that transitioned into agriculture and then that transition from agriculture into residential and then the commission sort of starting to pick up pieces of open space that they thought would help to benefit the community and make the quality of life in town better for residents and also provide wildlife habitat and other functions that conservation land can provide for the town. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen to pick up here and talk about how we continue to add to the land that is already out there.
Thank you, Emily. So as Emily already stated, the commission was formed and established in 1963, and their main purpose was for acquiring conservation land. So how do they do that? Well, they do it proactively and with planning. And as Emily stated, they acquired over 1,000 acres in the first 20 years, and then development happened, and it was harder to acquire land. But They continue to plan every 5 years, and in 1996, in preparation for an update of the Open Space and Recreation Plan, the commission formed a committee to actually do an in-depth planning process for land in town. And from that, they developed 4 criteria for evaluating the land. The first one is town character, the values and contributions of scenic, historic, and enhancement to the town. And so, for instance, the latest acquisition that the town did with Cotton Farm, that's a good one to show the contribution of scenic value. The next one is biological values, and this is rare species and wildlife. And I'm not sure if you're all aware, but Whipple Hill actually has an area of rare plant. And we don't tell people what it is, and we don't tell the location because we want to keep it protected. Another criteria is public access. So as you know, one of the goals of the commission is not only protection, but also passive recreation opportunities to get people out to enjoy and get educated about natural resources. So Cotton Farm's another good example of public access, because later on Bob will explain how this created a key access point for Upper Vinebrook to Dumbeck Meadow in town. And then the fourth is wetlands protection, which Emily had already stated in the 70s, the commission became responsible for wetlands protection. So once they had those criteria established of how to evaluate the land, what they did is they broke it down into, looked at the town and the open space parcels that were available, and they broke it down into three segments of town, which is the critical open space to protect, highly desirable, and desirable. And so in 1996, in preparation of that, they created this list in town, and that is what they use today for evaluating land and going after land. As you know, land, you never know when land's gonna become available, and when it does, you have to act quickly. So how is title obtained for conservation purposes? Well, it's through gifts. The commission does at times get gifts from people. It's through purchases, and we have, as you know, in the last 10 years, had about 4 purchases in town. And it's also through eminent domain, which is not often. And then the process of right of first refusal, as you know, like Chapter 61A land, agricultural land, that if they get tax credit for that, the town has the ability of right of first refusal when it goes up for sale, and the town can act on that. And then there's also the process of, if municipal land is owned for the town can transfer that to the Conservation Commission. So what are the steps in acquisition? Well, especially in purchasing, there's the process just like you would buy a house. There's the appraisal process, and the commission would obtains 2 appraisals for land. And then from that, they sit down with the owners and negotiate. And then there's a letter agreement, and at that time, if there involves money exchange and the commission needs money, they go to town meeting for a vote to expend funds. And then if town meeting approves it, then a purchase and sales is drawn up, and then there's a due diligence process. And then once that's up, the commission closes and the deed's transferred. And I'm not sure if you're all aware, but once the Conservation Commission is in ownership, it's protected by Article 97 of the state constitution, and it provides a permanent protection status. The only way to take that out of conservation would be through an in-depth process where the commission would have to vote, the Board of Selectmen, town meeting, and then the state legislature. So as you can see, it's definitely provides permanent protection for the town, and it's a great resource for the town. And so, as Emily also stated, we have over 1,400 acres in town, and so not only do I acquire it, but we also have to care for it and manage it and keep it open to the public. And we have a great group of volunteers that help us do that, because Emily and I are the only staff in the conservation office. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Stu, who's going to talk about management.
For a built-out suburb so near the metropolitan hub of Boston, Lexington is truly fortunate to have the amount of open space we have and to have so much of it protected as conservation land. Consisting of many gems, this conservation land is well distributed throughout town. Our job now is to properly care for it. I'm going to briefly explain what that care involves and how we provide it, and then Bob will describe the management steps planned and underway at one particularly interesting area, Cotton Farm. Within our 16 and a half square miles of land, 10,560 acres in town, 2,800 acres are open space. They're shown in light green here, of which almost half are in conservation, shown in dark green. Adding in the considerable amount of wetlands and streams, right? We have 20 streams in all, many of which overlap with or run through the conservation land and gets dense there. The 60 miles of trails, again, most of which are in or connecting to the conservation land. You get some appreciation for the size of the job of caring for the conservation land. So what do we mean by the term caring? Caring means managing for the following values, interests, and purposes. Biological values, meaning protecting habitat for wildlife and plants, keeping it available, accessible, and safe for various passive recreation uses, providing wetland protection, maximizing stream health and groundwater quality, promoting public education about our natural world, providing opportunities for community gardening, and preserving the extraordinary scenic beauty of Lexington. The balancing of these values, which often overlap but often also conflict, requires careful consideration for prioritization between them when we decide to manage how we will manage a particular parcel. This management planning itself is an important part of the conservation land management. Many of the management activities are best described in pictures. Here are some examples of improving or adding trails to balance accessibility and protection of the land. Again, the trade-off there between providing access and protecting the value of the land itself. Cutting back trees, shrubs, and grass growth to keep trails open. Closing or rerouting of unneeded or inappropriate trails, surprising how much of our time we spend doing that. Marking entries, adding information kiosks, and generally maintaining signage in the areas. Removing litter and trash. This photo in the lower left shows Beal Companies of Ledgemont in Lexington removing tons of dumped trash from either Cranberry Hill or Katahdin Woods. I don't remember which. Yeah, they've joined us each year for the last several to do some awesome work. Annual mowing of meadows, clearing fallen debris after storms, sampling water quality of streams and tributaries, and conducting public outreach and education are all important functions that the stewards are involved with, and the Conservation Office. It should be clear that this management job is a big one. So how is it done? We'll now talk about how it's organized between town staff and volunteers and who the players are. The town's Community Development Department, which is managed by Karen, has, among others, the Conservation Division, comprising our Conservation Administrator, again, Karen, our Conservation Assistant, Emily, and a Conservation Clerk, or a clerk in the office who devotes herself to quite a bit of our work. Working with the 7-member appointed Conservation Commission, they perform all the regulatory work mandated by the Wetland Protection Act that you heard about earlier, the state's regulations that are pertinent, and the town's applicable bylaws and regulations. With her other title, Conservation Stewardship Coordinator, Emily, in the the lower blocks there. Emily oversees paid and volunteer land management services. The paid work includes annual meadow mowing and emergency cleanups as needed done by the Public Works Department, trail clearing and other annual maintenance tasks that are done by our 2 part-time summer interns that we've had for the last several years and are really important to us. And occasional services from special consultants. An example of that is getting property bounds marked by surveyors, which we're doing in a couple of our areas now. Volunteer work is then planned and led by the Steward Directors. 10 or so of our most active stewards, several of whom are here today. I think we're about half of us are here. Why don't you guys raise your hands so that everybody knows? Don, you can raise your And I have to say, it's dangerous anytime we get together in a group like this, because you'll find us over in the corner, as we were before the talk started today, cooking up some new projects. Very dangerous. We meet monthly, the Steward Directors meet monthly, facilitated by Emily, to plan and manage the steward's work. And that work falls into these 3 categories. We have group projects that are organized for a specific group who want to do some conservation work for the town. We have special group projects that are usually done by our dedicated stewards, and there are many examples of those. Many of the boardwalks you see in the trail work and so forth are done under that category. And the third is local stewards, chief stewards at a particular area who get together to do annual maintenance work and just generally keeping an eye on the condition of their favorite spot. Yeah, much of the work is done also by groups that are organized by the Steward Directors and the Stewardship Coordinator. We get amazing jobs done by the Scouts. Particularly Boy Scouts qualifying for Eagle have done countless very valuable projects around town, and you'll see them when you see one of our kiosks or entry signs or some of our new trails. We've had several churches who have asked for projects, and we've organized specific projects for them. And then business employees, you saw the picture of the Beal companies, and Vistaprint also, and Liberty Mutual has done a project or 2 for us. These organizations call the office and ask for an opportunity for doing some conservation work, and Emily passes it to the Steward Directors. We come up with a project and then lead the project, coordinate and lead it. Much of the Steward Directors' efforts are spent identifying, prioritizing, and organizing special management projects, all in the interest and values of the land that the land is managed for. The thousands of feet of boardwalk built in the last dozen years are examples of results of these projects. We probably have between 1 mile and 2 miles of boardwalks now that we've built in the last dozen years. These projects themselves, big and small, are really beyond counting. The third category of steward tasks is the lead stewards in each of their areas, doing maintenance and general periodic update and reporting on problems. And that's also very, very important for us to know the status of all our dispersed areas. Other stewardship participants include high school students who show up for these 3 reasons, as well as others, I'm sure. Community service credits throughout their 4 years of school, 9th grade environmental science class credits, and because the Lexington High School athletic director has required her teams to do community service work, we've taken advantage of that also. We Steward Directors are still in awe of the amount of lumber carried for us by the boys and girls cross-country teams and track teams last fall and this spring. If it were left to us old-timers, we'd still be porting that lumber. Another source of volunteers that we're in the process of tapping, also for help in paint mine, the place that the cross-country teams help so much in, are troops and civilian employees at Hanscom Air Force Base, which we recently learned have a community service program in place. So we're hoping to tap lots of people over there also. We also get stewardship help from regular users of our, from visitors to conservation areas who may not be signed up as stewards and may not realize the values of their contributions when they pick up litter or observe and report a problem. But that's stewardship nevertheless, and it's very important to us. How is this big job paid for? Town staff, part-time summer interns, any approved program improvement requests that we're fortunate enough to get approved, and some incidental expenses are covered in the annual operating budget. Occasionally, some expenses are covered by money from one of the conservation trust funds. We've been very successful in qualifying for federal recreational trails program grants that are administered by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Over the last dozen years, we've gotten tens of thousands of dollars, often each year, for buying the material for our projects. Most of our maintenance tools have been bought with money raised by fundraising efforts, and generous private citizen donations have accounted for the rest. But the largest category of donations have come in the form of hours donated by our many volunteers. Last year, as Emily mentioned, last year alone, over 2,000 hours were logged by conservation volunteers, which is the equivalent of a full-time staff member. Before passing the microphone to Bob, I want to leave you with an invitation to get involved yourself as a steward. Let me ask, how many in the room here are signed up as stewards? Okay, there's a few of you who can still take advantage of this, and the people at home, definitely. If that's the tree of stewardship in Lexington, it's very easy to sign up as a conservation steward. I think Emily has put sign-up forms over on the table over there, or you could do it online, but please consider doing that. You can volunteer for very easy to satisfy jobs, or you could really get involved with those of us who plan all the projects. Monitor trails and conservation areas, just as I said before, just by going out and walking in an area and observing the condition and noting problems that you report is really valuable to us. You can donate to the Nature Trust, where we can tap to replace some of our tools, pick up trash and prune the vegetation back every spring, help us monitor our streams, help with work days and projects, and we've got lots of them that are really fun to work on. You can join the directors and meet with us once a month and help us plan how we will manage the areas as we go forward. Then, as you're an active steward director, you can take on a project yourself and organize it and get the satisfaction of seeing something completed. Help us apply for grants and feel like a steward. I have to say, it's a real honor to be involved with such a great organization and to work with these other folks. And I meant somewhere along the line to point this out. This field guide just came out. It's for sale in the office, and I think there may be some over here, but it's the result of a collaboration between the stewards, the Steward Coordinator, the Big Backyard Program, Lexington Education Foundation, and it's a field guide of plants, animals, insects that are most common in this area. It's designed for kids, but we can appreciate it also, we adults. And let me turn it over now to Bob to talk about his certain project.
Talking about the stewards, I've been a passive resident of Lexington for about 40 years, and only in the last 2 or 3 years became involved with the conservation stewards. And one of the great experiences of it, gradually it gets you to see all the conservation areas in Lexington. And the reaction is, my God, I didn't know we had all this great stuff in Lexington after 40 years. and I've taken some of my other passive friends on walks. And I wait for the magic words. I didn't realize we had all this great stuff in Lexington. So it's a delight, and the people are great. Let's get going. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is give you a little bit of a quiz. I'm going to show you two pictures. These are taken in a conservation area in Lexington. You have to guess what it is. That beautiful pond and the reflection. And there's a second picture of looking up into an open, cleared area. Anybody know where that is in Lexington? Okay, it's Cotton Farm, the area I'm going to be talking about. And the subtitle to this could be, especially after hearing we have 1,400 acres of conservation land, the subtitle could be, Much Ado About 4 Acres. So let's get going with Cotton Farm. And first, where the heck is Cotton Farm? And then I'll talk about its features and what the challenges are. And then I'll take you on a quick virtual tour of Cotton Farm. So where is it? Well, it's off Merritt Road. If you start in, coming from the east, let me see if I can find, there it is. Come off Mass Avenue at the Heritage Museum, and on your way over to Waltham Street, which is about there, about halfway, there's this little piece here, Cotton Farm. Okay, 4 acres, $4 million. Let's see, I guess I should stay closer to the microphone. So what's the big deal? Well, before the acquisition of Cotton Farm, this piece of property, conservation property called the Upper Vinebrook area, which has been in conservation for quite a while, was passive, virtually unused, unvisited, because most of it is wetlands. This portion is all wetlands, impenetrable, really. It had a trail in it that just basically started up at Highland Avenue and went down and stopped at the private property, which was the Cotton Farm portion of the Cataldo property at that time. So it was just a dead-end trail in the woods of no particular interest. By adding the Cotton Farm, now the trail passes through and goes down, crosses Merritt Road, enters the Bacon Street Trail in Dunback Meadow, and then from there you can go all the way to Clark School or all the way over to Bowman. And by the way, as the crow flies, from the entrance up there at Highland Avenue down to the Bowman School is about a mile, and it's about 1.5 miles of trail. So it's really trail through all conservation land. It's miraculous and delightful that is in Lexington. So one virtue of getting the land was this connectivity. By the way, for those of you unfamiliar with Highland Avenue, basically Highland aims straight at Lexington Center. You go up a few blocks and it hits Winthrop, and one leg of Winthrop goes over to Waltham Street, the other leg goes over to Mass Avenue at Woburn Street. So that's how you can find it. Let's now get into a little more detail about Cotton Farm itself. And this is a blow-up map, and by the way, we have the same map here later if anybody wants to get into some detail. Basically, to get you orientation now, this is the old Upper Vinebrook area here. So to the top and right, to the left, excuse me, we're all merging this with the Upper Vinebrook. So it's really all one piece of conservation land now. The main features are scenic features and otherwise. There's this apple orchard, which for those of you who've gone down Merritt Road, you may have seen the old apple orchard on the right if you're coming from the east. The entire area is open. It ranges from virtually lawn here to meadow to open woods, gladed area up through here and up into the darker traditional undeveloped woods of the old Upper Vinebrook area. The other feature, so this is all very scenic. You can basically walk around, see around it, very easy. The other big feature is that first picture I showed you, the pond scene. That's this pond in here. And by acquiring the land, it surrounds the pond totally in conservation land. So it makes it now protected habitat. Now, so those are some of the major features. I'll get into more of them. They're easier to see when we go through the virtual tour. I'd like to get into some of the challenges here. What are we doing with this place? How are we improving it and so on? Again, I'll show you some of the things on the tour, but the two things I would just as soon point out right now are, one, talking about that pond. The pond is virtually invisible. It's hidden behind a mass of vegetation along the shoreline. We want to make it more visible without damaging the habitat. One of the things we've done so far, and when I say we, I'm always referring to conservation stewards largely, with the aid of the summer interns, but a lot of this is conservation stewards' work. We've removed a wooden fence, an old wooden dock, and we're in the process of removing a wooden arbor to just open the area up, make it accessible. And the plan is to change a lot of the invasive species along the edge, dense invasive species, to more native species, and also to build some sort of a viewing platform that lets people really enjoy the view of that pond from all this open area. And again, a viewing platform that gives visible access but does not let people trample on the shoreline. Very important. The other challenge that we have is if you wander around Cotton Farm, whether you come in here or come in from the top, this end, this private property, the Cataldo and De Angelis residences, the border is, it's an arbitrary line, so to speak. It's not natural. It's not a natural feature. So the demarcation, it's very hard when you're walking around to understand. You have a sense of you're impinging on private property. So we are, to help the separation right now, we're putting up, gradually building a fence line along here and also a fence line along the top. And those dots there that you see are fence posts. And to begin with, we're putting up on each post, this kind of property boundary conservation division. But the idea is to gradually string those posts together with a fence, split rail fence. And that'll take a while. In short of that, we've just put up rope temporarily so people can feel, okay, I'm clearly on conservation land. I'm not walking on the private property. So I'll hit on some other features and work we're doing as we get into the tour, which I just assume begin now. Now, on the tour, we're going on a virtual tour. We're starting here at Merritt Road, and there's one of the signs put up by the conservation stewards of talking about what this area is, Upper Vinebrook Cotton Farm, and where the monies came from to do it. And here is the driveway entrance. We're going on a virtual tour. It'll take 2 or 3, maybe 5 minutes if I get wordy. But a real tour will take place 8 days from now, Saturday, October 13th. The Citizens for Lexington Conservation is sponsoring a tour of Cotton Farm, Upper the Vinebrook, and going across the street to Dunback Meadow. That'll run from 11 o'clock to 12:30. And these little flyers are out there, so you don't have to jot that down. But it should be a very interesting walk, weather permitting. And of course, if the weather's bad, it'll be delayed until Sunday. Anyway, let's start going into Cotton Farm. Here is the driveway. And I'll go a little further. Yeah, here we go. Note that immediately you see this is a driveway and a big grassy open area here. I'm going to first draw your attention to keep your eyes to the right, and then we'll come back to this spot, and then I'll tell you to keep your eyes to the left. So let's go down the driveway a little bit more. And you can see to the right of the driveway, this is the old apple orchard. There's about 80 or so trees in the apple orchard. I think they're all McCunes, but it's been over 30 years since anything's been done to the orchard, so it's just dormant. It barely blossoms. It does not make apples. Other than pruning it and keeping it from getting worse, one of our management projects is to figure out what to do with it. That doesn't require massive amounts of time and money. So continuing along the right side, another closer shot of the apple orchard. You can see how rough it's become. And then continuing, here's the new parking area on the right that the stewards have put in, and this is just another angle looking at the parking area. My apologies, by the way, for the various colors you see in these slides. The green ones are more accurate right now. The red ones is because my camera screwed up, or I should say I screwed up and didn't, okay. Continuing along the driveway, you can see the Cataldo House here. And you can barely see the sign there that says private property. But as you can see, the sense of it is that you're already on private property because this is nicely landscaped. And indeed, this property was just acquired 2 years ago. So we're really in the process of trying to figure out how do you maintain it looking nice, but change it so it doesn't look like private property, make it more friendly. Okay. I'm going to come back to the entrance as before, and this time I'm going to say, look to the left. Focus your attention to the left. And as we move down in here, we see this open picnic area. The pond that I'm talking about is hidden behind here. Let's get a little closer. We can start to see some water, and there's some funny structure here, which is the arbor. This is the remaining wooden structure. It goes out about 30, 40 feet. This remains to be taken out for obviously, at least for safety reasons, if not for aesthetic reasons. But that'll open up a bit of a view for a while. Okay, let's step back a little bit, shift our attention a little bit to the right. This is the area we're calling the picnic area. Easy to identify by the picnic table. Keeping this mowed, by the way, is quite a job. The Cataldos have agreed as part of the negotiation in getting this property to keep some mowing, but it gets complicated coordinating, and we do a lot of mowing ourselves, we conservation stewards. There's the picnic table again, and now we're coming to the little red house, the pump house that's on the property. Now we're down at the pump house looking back up toward the picnic table and up toward the driveway. What do we do with the pump house? Right now, it is empty. It used to contain a pump that would pump irrigation water to Cataldo Farm, the cotton farm. So various discussions. If we want to keep it, we better reshingle it and generally rehabilitate it a bit. Again, another project for management of cotton farm. One proposal, by the way, has been to use it as, in the winter, it's right next to the pond. The pond is just to your right, almost the same distance as it is to the door. Use it as a changing room, change ice skates in the winter. If we have another winter, though, like last winter, that may be moot. Anyway, so let's move back up to the driveway now, and we're going to continue. So we've looked at the right parking area, and that piece there goes up to the Cataldo House. We've looked to the left, and now we're going to continue up this way, and now we're getting into more and more meadow and transitioning into open woods, open glade. This area is basically scheduled for mowing once a year, just to keep it clear and avoid bushes and so on, make it passable. We really just mowed this literally about a week ago when these pictures were taken. So this is unusually low. It's usually grassier than this. And now we're going getting up toward the old Upper Vinebrook area. In other words, up toward the woods. And gradually entering the woods. Okay, that's woods. Now here we are in the Upper Vinebrook area, and you can see this is the traditional woods that's just full of, broken old logs and brush and so on. It's very hard to go cross-country in there. So that's a different character entirely from what we're trying to maintain in the cotton farm area, portion of this. We're moving up the trail, and gradually we come up and we cross a stream that has one of our Boy Scout bridges. Dan Palmer, Eagle Scout candidate, built that about, I think it was in the spring of this year, because the boards still have that fresh look to them. That, by the way, is one of our standard Conservation Stewards 32-foot bridges we build. They basically have the very, very similar construction. It makes it easier to give instructions to people how to do it and know what materials to have. So you see a lot of these all over town in conservation areas. Anyway, continuing up the path, now we're going north up toward Highland Avenue. We go through lots and lots of woods. I'm not just going to show you lots and lots of woods pictures. I'm going to show you now as we're reaching up Highland Avenue and emerging onto Highland, and we come a little bit closer, emerging. That's Highland Avenue straight ahead and Washington Street to the right. Notice this little post here that we just put up. Now I'm going to give you a view from the other side of the post, looking in, and it says, aha, 300 feet ahead is an entrance to conservation land. That's because that last 300 feet is really on public street rather than the actually conservation land as such. And just as a side comment, understanding the restrictions and on public, did I say public street? I meant to say paper street. Paper streets, these things left over from developers that were going to put a street there and they didn't. Who owns it, who has rights to it, and so on. Trying to understand that is what I call another one of these full employment for real estate lawyers laws. And I think they're unique to Massachusetts. But anyway, so 300 feet ahead, you're at the entrance. And let me just back off a little bit more, because if you want to visit Cotton Farm and Upper Vinebrook and go over to Dunback Meadow, et cetera, from this end, from starting in Lexington Center, you might come down Highland Avenue here, Washington Street there, and there's the sign we were talking about. Now let me go down, just down 300 feet, and there's another sign we recently had made by volunteers, particularly Bob Mandel really made this up in his shop, designed it and cut it and did all the templating and, to make it. And a number of us volunteers were there digging holes and securing the thing. Unfortunately, the picture of the group got blurry, so Bob Mandel gets to hold this by himself, but he did, obviously, clearly did the most work on it, Bob Mandel and friend. Okay, so that pretty well covers the quick tour. The one or two other points I always want to make, I want to come back to, this was the original picture, the teaser, where is this in Lexington, this great shot. Basically, that's taken from the spot where you saw the little red house. If you just walked a little bit to the right there and looked out, because the old dock was taken out there, so there's a clear spot so you can actually see it. And this is the area we want to be able to make a viewing platform. So we're thinking about, this is a big project, figuring out how do you make a viewing platform, what kind do you want, how do you keep the invasives, build a platform without damaging the shoreline, et cetera. But we're looking at viewing platforms, and I just showed two of them because I think they're interesting. Here's a view, this is what I call a nice kind of standard viewing platform, such as the one over in, this one is over in Lexington at Lincoln Park, on the nature boardwalk that goes around Lincoln Park. The next one I want to show, if we get fancy, is this is one over in Cambridge, in the Fresh Pond area. There's a small pond next to Fresh Pond called Black's Nook Pond, and they recently went through an extensive rehabilitation, a big deal. But this, and let me give you another view. I mean, this kind of curved, it just is very exciting to have something like that. That just gives it punch, to have the idea that we might just be able to pull something like that off on the pond that, to my knowledge, has no name, just Cotton Farm Pond, I guess we call it. I don't know if it has a name listed anywhere. So that's basically the tour and the possibilities. The one other thing I wanted to just show on this is, again, plugging for our volunteers. Here's a volunteer at work. She's also wears many hats. She's also been known to run video cameras. Peggy Enders by name. I want to just emphasize that she is donating her time. The mower tractor that she's running there, it was donated to the town, to the conservation, I guess the CLC as a mechanism, by a town, very generous town resident. So we're getting all this machinery and all this work for nothing, which is really great. So with that, I'll pass it back.
So as you can see, conservation land acquisition and management is an important function within the town and enhances the community in a great way. And we hope you are sitting there wondering how you can help manage conservation land and get involved if you aren't already. We mentioned you can become a steward, but we're also, as I mentioned before, the commission proactively does planning, and it's time to update the open space and recreation plan in the next year. So we will be looking for public comment on that. As part of that, we look at goals for the town for the next 5 years and hope you can provide feedback. And with that, I will open it up for questions for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. Can I just put in one editorial comment here? And I'm disappointed. Would be Community Preservation Act. That's where all the money's coming from now. And when you talk about Cotton Farm, $4 million, that had to be voted by the committee, which I happen to be on, and by the town meeting. And so that was a big deal. And I think we all probably know this, but it needed to be said. Anyway, we can take questions now. If you have any questions, our panel will be happy. Jerry.
My question is, could you clarify the difference between the conservation stewards and the Citizens for Lexington Conservation?
Oh, it is on. Okay.
It's on.
That is very confusing. It's quite confusing. So the Lexington Conservation Stewards is the volunteer stewardship arm of the commission. It's not a nonprofit. It's not its own organization. It just operates as a volunteer arm of the commission and focuses mostly on maintenance and stewardship of conservation land. Citizens for Lexington Conservation is its own nonprofit organization that's in town, that's existed for a long time. And my understanding is that their focus is a little bit more on education and natural history, and is not necessarily associated with the Conservation Commission, although they are often hosting walks on conservation land and concerned with the care of conservation land. It's quite confusing because the names are very similar and we do a lot together. Citizens for Lexington Conservation helped the stewards conduct a fundraiser to fundraise for tools and a tool shed a couple of years ago. We've recently partnered up to combine our newsletters because we were sending a separate stewardship newsletter and CLC was sending its own newsletter. So we had a good partnership there and were able to team up. And so the stewardship side of things will just include an update in every Citizens for Lexington Conservation newsletter. We should really change those names. They're very similar, so it's quite confusing, but.
I probably can add a little something too. I think Citizens for Lexington Conservation does a lot more than just land conservation. I believe they do a lot with just environmental issues as well.
I've got just one more quick question, and that is there a brook leading into and a brook leading out of this cotton farm pond?
There are several, just talking. Okay. There are several small streams that lead into the pond, such as the one you saw with the Boy Scout Bridge. Leading out, it's really one of the headwaters to Upper Vinebrook, and I think it leads out at that picture over to the right in back.
A couple of questions. Where did the name come from? And also, does the cotton farm area go to the edge of Sherburne Road, which is below Highland?
Right. I think the second question is easier to answer. The Upper Vinebrook area, which Cotton Farm merged with just that corner, I believe does go to the edge of Sherburne Road. At least if it's conservation land there, it is the Upper Vinebrook conservation land. They're all wetlands. The name Cotton Farm, I know the owner, but Stu, you look like you would know.
There was a man named Judge Cotton who owned the property, and I don't know if he farmed or not. I don't know if anyone knows, but he was the owner before the Cataldos.
So cotton was never grown there?
No.
No, I'm sure it wasn't.
No. Shirley Stoltz?
And yes, yeah, I was going to suggest that everybody identify themselves so we get to know each other.
I was curious to know if you have any plans for the North Street land, those of you who are on the Stewardship Committee, because in my view, the pond there, which was, I guess, dug for the purposes of excavating
Sand.
sand for building the town, has one of the most beautiful little ponds in Lexington. In fact, there were several of us who used to call it Golden Pond. And it's up high, so you really don't want to try to walk down to the edge of it. But it's a very beautiful vista, and there is land adjacent to it, just off of, I think it's North Street. There's a little chunk that belongs to the town that could be used for parking, but there's really no place to park on North Street
That's right.
because it's posted. And in my view, it's one of the prettiest little pieces of land that we now own, and it does connect to the end of the bike path. So I really would like to put that on the table if it isn't there already.
The commission has an extensive project list that the stewards develop, and this is definitely on the project list. One of the things, as you saw with Cotton Farm, a good thing to do before you open up land is to do a good land management planning process. And so before starting to do a big opening up and putting in trails, the commission wants to do a big planning type process, and that does take time. And so that right now there are other priority projects, but that is definitely something on the list.
I've got a question. I'm Rick Abrams, and we talked to Karen about acquisition. I'm curious, how much land is available, do we think, for possible acquisition, or is that an almost impossible question to answer?
Yeah.
It's impossible because you never know really what's out there. I think with the next probably open space and recreation plan, I think we're gonna look at that 1996 list again and hopefully get it on a GIS later, and maybe we'll be able to tell at that time what's still open and what's available. And another good thing about that is, as you know, some of the criteria, it'll be better be able to see that, especially with the open space, trying to create connections, which I know the Greenway Corridor Committee, through their Cross Lexington project, is interested in.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask a question because I have the mic, and then I'll bring it over there. I'm Nancy Adler. 2 questions regarding numbers. You mentioned the 2,000 hours plus that people are contributing. Do you have any notion, whether it's 1 hour or somebody giving 200 hours, how many people you have who are volunteering to maintain this land?
Yeah, so I would say, so we started keeping track about 4 years ago, where I would ask everybody, I send out a month, if you sign up as a steward, you'll get a monthly e-newsletter that I send out that asks people to do stuff, and then I also put in a plug that says, if you do anything, just send me your hours. So it's a somewhat informal tracking, but it's just whenever somebody remembers to send me information, they'll do that. So I think there are a lot of people doing things that I don't even know, that we don't even know. I think there are a lot of citizens who walk and might pick up trash or prune trails that we're not even aware is happening, and we're very happy that that always happens. We have about 200 people on our stewardship e-newsletter that we send out, and that's the people we're most in contact with. And then I would say we have about maybe 15 to 20 people who are very, very active. As Stu mentioned, we have our Steward Directors group, and that's around 10. And then there are lead stewards at some of our conservation properties that are very involved with one specific property. And then in addition to that, a big chunk of time comes from the Eagle Scout contribution. So their projects tend to be, I would say on average around 100 hours, and that will be one Eagle Scout candidate leading the project and usually 8 to 10 other scouts helping out. And we get more and more every year. We probably have I think we have maybe 7 going on right now. So I'd say every year we have probably 10 to 12 projects that happen, so.
I really would urge you, as best you can, to make sure the community understands just how deep the tentacles are of people who care about keeping good conservation land. The second question I have, which also is numbers, and I'm never a number person, I don't know how this happens. Do you have any sense of how used in terms of going to conservation land we have in the community? People don't take a shit when they walk in, so obviously there's no way to necessarily know. But I just sort of wonder, when I drive in Winchester by the area on that's South Border Road there, you can see all the cars parked, so you have a sense as someone going by of who is actually, that the people are actually walking the land or using the land in some way. Do you have any sense of the usage of our land?
Yeah, we don't have a great number. Like you said, it's kind of hard to track because it's pretty nebulous, and some get used more than others. For a while, we were when I was going out, had just an inventory sheet that I was filling out just to see what activities people were doing on conservation land and how many people I would see in it. You know, if I was out for an hour or two or something like that. We don't have a solid number. I would say the biggest usage that we see is usually walking and running. Those are the two things that people do most frequently, I think.
I just want to add an anecdotal report on that question. Keith Omart, I'm one of the stewards, and I was driving down Adams Street past Chiesa Farm when school let out the other day, and was just thrilled to see little groups of students coming over from Diamond across Chiesa Meadow. And it's a perfect example of where we were able to, with the prior restrictions on access to that meadow, when we were finally able to open it up, it's being used now, being used by the community, the kids are using it, and I mean, this is just a wonderful opportunity as we continue to develop access to the open space we have in town.
Edie Sandy. First of all, I'd like to say that I am just delighted that we are now keeping some of the meadow areas in town mowed, because it's made a huge difference. In Parker Meadow and Willard's Woods, there were places that were really growing up to be woods that are now back to being meadows. Having said that, I would also like to put in a plug for preserving some of the edible vegetation that grows in those areas. There is an area in Willard's Woods, for example, that would be a wonderful blackberry patch if the blackberries ever got to grow to their second or third year. And every year they get mowed down, and that's the end of them. Also in Willard's Woods, the path that goes close to Whittier Road and so forth used to pass very close to what was a wonderful blackberry patch. It's now gotten so the blackberry patch is so far away that you really can't get to it anymore. So in maintaining, and I fully realize that the blackberries come with both poison ivy and bittersweet, so it's not as pure as one might think, but I would like to put in a little bit of a plug for making some of those, $2.50 for 6 ounces fruits available for less money.
I would say that could be a new stewardship position, blackberry patch tender. I would be happy to engage anyone who's interested in that. Take you right on.
Hi, I just have a question that I'm just curious about. Who built the boardwalk at the corner of Worthen and Waltham Street by the high school?
Are you talking the one on the high school property?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the stewards were involved in that, helping the schools design it. But the schools, I think it was through the landscape committee that.
Oh, because it was a really good idea, and it looked like your work, so that's why I was wondering.
It was based on the steward specification.
And Keith, right behind you there was one of the consultants.
Anyone else? Yep.
at this lake. Could you just explain a little bit about the relationship with the Western Greenway? Because I live over on that side, and the part of the trails that are used on the Lexington property are used a lot, and they're beautiful. So if people not using them, but I'm never quite sure, as sort of a minor steward, what our roles can be, because I know it's combined with 3 different communities, and I'm not sure where the responsibility falls out.
Yeah, I can answer that, or address that. The Western Greenway Trail System is a regional trail system connecting trails in Belmont, Lexington, and Waltham. And it was the brainchild of primarily the director of Habitat Sanctuary, Roger Rubel, working with initially Waltham Land Trust in developing trails in their communities. And we formed collectively a regional organization that is a member organization involving members of Citizens for Lexington Conservation, Waltham Land Trust, Belmont Citizens Forum, Mass Audubon Habitat Sanctuary, to do central planning to develop this trail network, which eventually, when it's finished, will be over 8 miles in length, and it'll complete a circle through those 3 communities. The Lexington portion crosses primarily DCR property, the Vinebrook Met State. And so that's who maintains those trails. It's a volunteer effort on the part of that coalition organization, and if anybody would like to know more about it, I'd be happy to speak to them afterwards.
Just ask you one question. A lot of poison ivy is up in there, and I'm not sure about other areas of Lexington, and it sort of makes you back away from walking it. And I wonder if that's been addressed, if anything can be done, because there's a lot of it in that Lexington piece that sort of deters you from wanting to walk.
Yeah,
The trails are very narrow.
It's DCR property, and so we need to work with the property manager there for Department of Conservation and Recreation, and it's a struggle that we have here in our own town trails, and mowing is about the only thing you can do, and it's a volunteer effort to keep the trails open, because again, DCR doesn't have the money to maintain the trails, and so as Emily said, Chief Steward in charge of poison ivy, I'd love to talk to you.
Just a quick addition. I believe there are at least 12 miles of trails right now. I believe there are at least 12 miles in trails right now on the Western Greenway, and there are more to be finished, so we're way past 8. I help put up signs and do maintenance and stuff.
Okay, one more question, please. Sita? Or Natalie? Natalie.
Hi, Natalie Griffin. Some of us sitting here are old enough to remember Judge Cotton himself and the original members of the Conservation Commission. And I think we'd like to know who the Conservation Commission members are at the present time,
Yep.
how they're appointed, and what they do in relation to the purchase and maintenance of open space.
Thanks, Natalie. A good point, former select woman.
So currently, there are 7 members of the Conservation Commission. Joyce Miller is the chair. We have Phil Hamilton as vice chair. We have David Langseth, Richard Woke, Duke Bitsko, Jane Warren, and Stu Kennedy.
Thank you. Okay, I want to thank you all again, and I want to thank very much Peg Enders, who has been videographing and producing this program for 3 years, and she is ready to relax from that position, and we're looking for a substitute, or a fill-in, actually, a new person who would be a videographer and produce. If there's anyone here that is interested, please speak to me, or if you know of anyone who might be, and I'm sure that they would be trained and supported at the beginning of this checks, and I think Peggy would be happy to help in that regard. So thanks, Peggy. All right, and I want to talk about, just briefly, next month, our first Friday is called Fight or Flight, Hanscom Air Force Base, a discussion which will be led by Deb Mauger, Gene Krieger, Senator Ken Donnelly, and a representative from Hanscom Base, which his name I don't have in front of me, but he is involved with the communications area. So that should be a very good one. And again, the October 30th meeting that we're sponsoring, and there's material on that here on the desk, which is the voting wars of 2012. That also sounds militaristic. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Terrific, that was good. Thank you, Emily. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
I meant to mention, this is sponsored by the LEF.
It is.
I like to give credit to why things happen.
Yeah.
I used to be involved as a sponsor at Bank of Boston Fleet. And